Jeremy, we were talking a lot, really about this classic theoretical balance the governments have to strike between protecting the institutions of democracy and the will of the people versus overriding perhaps national security and public health concerns. We are in the middle of this very real situation where you have a public health pandemic. At the same time, you have to protect as much as can to safeguard democratic institutions. So you were talking about before, perhaps the vote can't happen to oust the Knesset Speaker because you're not going to have more than 2 or 3 lawmakers in the room at any one time. But the will of the people, there's a majority of lawmakers who would want to vote on that as soon as possible, even if they can't, because of the public health issue, be in the same room. Can there be a way, should there be a way found to around that so that the vote could take place because a majority wants that vote?
Look, if you have a consensus, so then you're fine. But when you don't have a consensus, you have to go by the law, because that's what you have to do in a democratic society. So, I mean, one of the ways to go about it, like I said, is if you're able to get the same 61, the recommended Gantz, at the president's residence to say we've signed coalition agreements, Balad is now going to be part of the coalition government, and go ahead and ask for a vote. And Edelstein, by law, would be forced to go ahead and carry that vote with everyone in at the same time, regardless
but he could
of what
choose
the
to have
health
a vote
is.
today. Is he subverting the will of the people? Is he subverting democracy,
so again,
taking advantage of COVID?
So again, the law...
go in to get sworn in, and while they're being sworn in, just give their vote so that they can have a vote for
So like I said, changing the way that the votes work, these are, changing some of the most, delicate matters within our democracy. If you come to a consensus, which is really what we should be doing, and we're not seeing that. Unfortunately, the entire idea of really trying to go ahead and throw Edelstein out today in the inauguration date is not exactly the best starter for national unity talks, let's be honest. According to the law, once you have had the vote and you have determined who the Knesset Speaker is, you need to have 90 votes. You have to have 3/4. It's a very special majority. Very few laws are like that in order to go ahead and choose a new speaker. So again, to go ahead and make this decision today, if you ask me, that is what is not needed right now in our democracy. Right now, when we're dealing with some of the most delicate times that our state has ever dealt with, and for sure economically the most delicate since 2008, this is not the time to try to oust the speaker. This is not the time for Gantz, who's the prime minister designate, to go ahead and say things that are not exactly the most positive of the sitting interim prime minister at this current moment. Everyone needs to act responsibly.
Your thoughts on that?
I don't like whataboutism, but in terms of acting responsibly and saying the right things, I think the Prime Minister has been gravely guilty of saying things that are so destructive for managing a crisis, let alone a political situation, let alone establishing a government of all people in this country. If you call for a national emergency government to deal with a global pandemic, to deal with a virus that does not understand borders or ethnicities or races, and you say everybody is invited in and you leave out the representatives of 20% of the citizens of Israel, I think that it is absolutely legitimate. I think that it is absolutely legitimate for the person who is designated to be prime minister to call upon the prime minister to stop that kind of incitement and attacking portions of the population. And that is a legitimate criticism in a democracy, precisely in order to get to a functioning government at a time of crisis.
The joint list got 11 or 12% of the vote, and this was with very high turnout within the Arab areas, historic turnout, I should say. 11 or 12%, not 20% or 25%.
20% of the
and
population.
I want to say, no, for you to say that the entire Arab population, the entire non-Jewish population who voted for the joint list is wrong.
Say that. First of all, it's 87% of them voted for the joint list.
To ignore the fact, for you to ignore the fact that also Jews vote for the joint list is also not correct.
Why would I ignore that? I was part of that campaign.
What you are saying is that when he's saying that the joint list cannot be a part of the government, what you are saying is that is the same as saying that the non-Jewish population cannot be a part of that government, and that is wrong what you are saying, because there are non-Jewish MKs in blue and white in Likud and Yisrael Beitenu, and they are welcome to go ahead and be a part of this government. To say that this is some sort of racist act, and I've seen this stuff all over social media, and it's something that really bothers me, because again, not all non-Jews voted for the joint list, and the joint list is not exclusively not its voter base or its MK pays a non-Jewish party.
But
So to suggest that it's one and the same is just factually wrong.
What Dahlia was talking about.
It's factually
87%,
wrong.
an historic high of the Arab
To say
population.
that-
Okay, let me finish. 87% of the Arab population, which is a historic high, voted for the joint list. So it's hard to deny that that is the main representative of the Arab population, for one thing. Of course, there were Jews who voted for the joint list, too. They think that's a good thing. But the point is, if you think you can manage a crisis without complete coordination and buy-in from the representatives of 87% of the voters who
There's
represent...
difference
who
between
represent- don't interrupt me.
coordination and
Don't
being a
interrupt me.
part of the
Don't
government.
interrupt me. Who represent together 20% of the population and any Jews who voted for them, who also make up a disproportionate percentage of the medical system in Israel, you're not going to have the same kind of coordination of decision-making and buy-in. Why would you send that message in a time of crisis?
Again, what you are suggesting is something that is very different than the words that were actually said by the Prime Minister. You can decide to go ahead and interpret it the way that you are choosing to do so. The non-Jewish population are being affected the same way everyone else is.
So then why shouldn't the joint
shouldn't they
list
participate in
So the reason the joint list are not welcome in the emergency government that was called by Netanyahu is that they reject Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. And that is one political argument, unlike all the others, which we cannot just take and put on the back burner. That doesn't mean that everyone doesn't deserve equal rights or equal treatment or anything like that.
But no, in the joint list, as opposed to people interpreting Netanyahu wanting to leave out the joint list. Maybe this is the time when they need to join forces and deal with the pandemic.
So I will tell you, even in 1967, when we had an emergency government, it was 111 of the 120. It was not everybody. When we're talking about, yes, 11 to 12% of the population that voted for the joint list, that does not mean that we need to have all 120 MKs in the same place. Just as we had an existential threat back then, we have the same thing right now. It's a crisis. You don't need everyone within the government. You can coordinate with people when they're not members of the government.
Message do you
This
send
is
to
the
society?
Jewish and democratic state of Israel, and I don't exactly see the joint list saying that they want to be a part of that.
I don't see that Netanyahu's comparison of what we're dealing with now to the 1967 war is a legitimate comparison. A war is all about borders. A war is all about territorial defense and conquest. Of course, you would have trouble creating a government that includes the very population that you're fighting against. But this is a different challenge. This is a challenge of a virus that does not distinguish between any kind of people. And these are the people who make up such a big portion of our medical community, and I do not have any justification or any other way of interpreting what the Prime Minister said for refusing to join hands with the people who need to be part of fighting this concern.